So what I'm looking for, or my plan as a advanced educational professional, what I want to do to use data and data analysis to ensure my continuous improvement plan is focused on closing achievement gaps, or just gaps in general, I guess. I want to form some focus groups made up of representatives from all stakeholder groups. And I want them looking at data, all four sources, so achievement, demographic, processes, and perceptions. And then we're going to go through that whole process, assessing where we are, specifically looking for those gaps. And then for the next step, I want to look at the processes that we may have in place that are actually creating these gaps. And then the next step I want the group to do is identify which gaps that we want to close, set up some short and long-term goals, and then kind of assign roles and responsibilities, because I see parents having specific roles for closing the gap, teachers, students. So then my part, as I see my role and responsibility, will be to set up PLCs in the school, making sure that we have a common PLC time by grade level, and then looking at that data in PLC. So I want the data to be accessible, like through a shared Google Sheet, so that it can be analyzed to specific essential questions and the identified gaps for that particular grade level. And then I want the teams, while they're in those PLCs that I identify as weekly, to identify, are there holes in the curriculum, global changes that we need to make because there's just a huge gap, or where are those specific gaps, and how are we going to go about differentiating and reteaching to fill those gaps. And then at least once a semester, so like at the end of first semester and at the end of the school year, bring all of those representatives from the stakeholder groups back together to determine if we're making a difference, and then what needs to be changed in the plan and in our efforts. Okay, that's kind of what I've got. So any questions you guys have?
So you talked about the process of like the group, and that group's going to identify areas that could use improvement. How would you go about that? Like, would you send that out through like a Google document, like a form for them to fill out so they can express their concerns on areas that they feel that could use some improvement?
Yeah, I think you hit it. I want to definitely make sure that we do some prep prior to us all coming back together as a group, so that they've got a chance to look at the data and come to the table with ideas, because otherwise I think a cold read will waste a lot of time.
You had mentioned common PLC time. Where will you find the time to do that? Where those same groups can kind of get together and go over this data, and specifically what to utilize that time effectively.
Right. So my plan is the PLCs will be for teachers only. So I won't have like parents and students in that group. So I'm going to carve out time that we currently have in our schedule when others are engaged in specials, when students are in specials. So at least once a week, I've got enough planning time built in so that we can look at that data. And then you had a second question.
Yeah, as far as having that be an efficient time when you meet, what data would you maybe specifically look at?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that, I'm going to participate and be there and kind of be the facilitator initially and provide PD. Oh, I left that out. Okay, so in addition to the PLC time, I want to do professional development for all the teachers, really on how to run an effective PLC, as well as PD on effective instructional practices. And then there was one other thing. Oh, and then on effective data analysis. So I want to kind of front load the beginning of the year with that PD so they do know what they're doing when they're in PLCs. Sorry, left that key component out.
No, I think the only roadblock you may run into is, being able to have all the funds to send all those teachers to a professional development. My one suggestion would probably just be getting like one point person. So you send one person from that grade level that would be in charge of that PLC, and that cut your numbers down significantly on who you send to a professional development.
Okay.
And then they can kind of take the lead on it and lead out the rest of the teachers through it.
Okay.
I think that's a great idea, though.
Yeah, I really like the idea when you talked about having the stakeholders, and then you also talked about the PLC time with teachers. Is there a possibility, a way to merge those at some point to where that you have some stakeholders kind of part of that group, almost like a mentor in a way? We use them at the high school for different industries when we want to know if we're teaching the right things to certain students. And so, maybe that's the same way with closing those gaps. Maybe they're able to identify something that we don't see.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. Okay. Any other ideas, you guys?
All I had.
Okay. So I appreciate that. So I think that those are all doable. Like, I like the idea of how to select out who to get the PD to, knowing that you can't do it for your whole staff, especially if it's a large staff. And then also figuring out a way to bring in those stakeholders, whether it's parents or students or the community, to make sure that we're focused on the right thing. So I think that sounds like a great starting point. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Good.
Okay.
So I guess who's up next?
I can go next. That's fine.
Okay.
Let me make sure I record here. Okay, as an advanced educational professional, one of the things that I think is important as far as data and getting data involved is to change culture and bond with students, build those relationships, and also support the staff, and just share some ways that they can utilize data, and data collection, and its importance. A couple of focus groups. Our minorities are scoring in the lower part of, I think it's 13%, only scored in the top 2 levels in reading and math, and also students on an IEP. So I think there's some of the game plans to help with that would, of course, the relationship building with minorities. Also with special education is, I don't think we have time to meet about IEPs and get as specific as we need to with some of those learning disabilities. Right now they send it to us electronically and we're able to review that for a short period of time. I mean, I keep them in a folder on my computer, but as a teacher, I get about 40 to 50 of those. And I think we need more time to sit down with those teachers, whether it's in a group situation or an individual, to go over those IEPs at the beginning of the school year, or as we get new students in during that time. But I think that's one of the ways that we can close both of the education gaps.
like you mentioned, all those IEPs that come your way, I agree with you 100%. You know, as a teacher, you know, you get them passed down to you throughout the school year. But do they provide you with like any time to meet with that IEP? I should say the case manager to kind of get more information about that IEP on that student.
Yeah, there's no set time, and that's something, you know, that as a educational leader that I would want to do is to create that time to where, you know, a specific teacher is going over their caseload. So every teacher that's with that particular student would meet, and then we'd run through each student that teacher has. And so we would utilize that PD time at the beginning of the year that I feel is sometimes wasted. And I think that would be a great way to utilize that time to implement each student with all of those teachers involved.
You mentioned like building relationships with minority groups and students with disabilities. Kind of how do you propose to do that?
Sure. Great question. I think a lot of times with minority students is they feel ignored. And I think if, you know, calling them by name, understanding, you know, a little bit more about their traditions and some of the things that are important to them. And, you know, I think there's ways we can do that through assignments. You know, I have the students, as a teacher, I have students fill out cards to kind of talk about themselves a little bit. And so, you know, utilizing that and showing teachers how to connect with students, I think as a leader would be the best way. But, you know, just like I said, calling a student by their name goes a long way.
Would you try and implement at our school? We do capturing kids' hearts. That's something that really focuses on building those relationships with the students and whatnot. Would that be something that you'd be interested in, like trying to bring to your school to help with that relationship building as well?
Yeah, I think there's you know, anything that we can do to implement those relationships can help a lot. You know, another way is getting our teachers more involved outside of school as far as kids' activities and going to the, you know, when a kid sees you show up for their play, you know, it's a really big deal when they know that you're sitting in the stands or in the audience. So a couple of the things that that I was needing help with, one of them is just, you know, kind of finding that time during the school year to get together as a group. I think that's definitely an issue, and also changing teacher perception on data and the importance of it. You know, when you get into a PD or PLC and, you know, if it's something that maybe seems boring to them or unimportant to them, you know, I want this to be something that they understand is vital to student success.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, maybe in terms of changing that teacher perception, how to make the data as accessible as possible, like already charted or graphed for them so they can get right down in it. It makes the most efficient use of their time. Because I feel like that's when we've gotten bogged down in the past. Like, we're spending all this time trying to figure out what the data is saying that we run out of time to actually do anything with it. So that's one thing I've been trying to think about, ways to make it not so it's done for them, because then I think you lose buy-in, but trying to figure out a way to make it more efficient. Then I think they could be like, how do you model maybe as a principal that data is important or exciting, or like, how do you incentivize that? Or I don't know. I'm just trying to think of ideas to, as a principal, what you could do.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I talk a little bit about